I'm Gerald Keneally, and thank you for joining us at Timor Time 2020. Elizabeth Biok is not afraid to take on a big challenge. As a refugee lawyer, she took on the federal government. Trusted by the United Nations, she was an observer to the 1999 East Timor referendum on independence. The lead up to the election and the aftermath of that election was like nothing we have ever seen in this country. Elizabeth Biok shares her experience of this important time.
My closest first real contact with the Timorese was in the early 1990s. I was a refugee lawyer working at Legal Aid, and after the Santa Cruz massacre in 1991, many young Timorese were fleeing to Australia to seek safety and protection. I became their lawyer for the ones in Sydney. They came and they applied for refugee status, and we filled in their applications, and everybody agreed these people were certainly refugees under international law. They were fleeing from persecution, and they had the scars and the trauma to show what had happened to them. We thought everything was going well until the Australian government decided there was another issue. Well, they put up the myth that the Timorese were not only Indonesian citizens but also Portuguese citizens. It was a very worrying time for the Timorese, for the young asylum seekers, and for all the people who'd got to know them in the few years that they'd been in Australia. And we had to show that that really did not stop them being refugees. And we did that. The full federal court, 3 judges, looked at this case and said, well, legally, by operation of law, they might be Portuguese, but this Portuguese nationality doesn't give them any rights and doesn't allow them to enter Portugal at this time and with ease. So it was a great victory for the people who'd supported the Timorese, who'd fed them and who'd helped them. In 1999, I was a member of a legal group that went to Indonesia a year after the old Suharto regime had collapsed. President Habibie came in and was talking to us, and he used the metaphor of a plane to describe Indonesia. And he said, well, when you have a plane that has a problem, you try and get rid of that part of the mechanism that's not working properly, and your plane is better. And with that in mind, I think we need to have a ballot, and maybe we need to get rid of the Timor problem. We all sat there looking at each other going, what is he really saying? And I can remember somebody asked the president to repeat what he said, and he said yes. And within a month, he had got the UN in and they were planning the ballot. So I was an election monitor down in Swai on the south coast of Timor for the independence ballot. It was just unbelievable. It wasn't like election day in Sydney where people are milling around with posters, selling you sausages or selling you cakes. We got there before dawn and there were already hundreds of people. People were looking on this as something crucial, something that would be a changing moment in their lives and in their country's life. One of the big problems in monitoring the voting, and for the electoral officers who are in my polling booth, largely from India, was that so few women were literate. The men could largely write their own name, but in this area, which is a long way away from Dili and where people are really subsistence farmers, very few women could even write their own names. They couldn't even write their initials. Some of them could make a cross, and some of them could just put an ink thumbprint. And I can remember thinking, well, this is the legacy of the Indonesian occupation, that women as young as 20 can't write their own name. The Timorese had really suffered neglect under the Portuguese and then had suffered oppression under the Indonesians. And at that time, the Indonesian military were really promoting and supporting the militia groups. There were often trucks with loudspeakers telling people not to vote for independence. When the voting was being counted and people saw that over 90% of the Timorese voted for independence, the militia were just allowed to run wild throughout any part of Timor. They were just torching and burning and shooting. The idea was that the Timorese had to be punished for the fact that they had voted against remaining with Indonesia. And the town became a scene of incredible destruction. Some nights the New Zealand civilian police would come down to where I was staying with the other two Australian monitors and say, "Tonight we fear it's going to be really dangerous. Have your little bag packed with you and wear your sneakers. You've got to sleep in your sneakers." And we were ready. If at any time they came down and knocked at the door, we would get up and we would have to run. And there were many towns in Timor, especially up in the mountains around Maliana, where I know other observers actually had to leap from their beds and run because of the fear that the militia would target any foreigners who were in Timor to monitor the ballot. I went back to Timor in January 2000 with some lawyers and was aware of how difficult this whole process of the ballot had been for the Timorese, not only because of the destruction that had occurred across Timor, but also because of what had happened to their relationships and their families. Many Timorese families were split. There were some who were on the independent side, who had fought for independence since the 1970s. There were some who were associated with the Indonesian government and occupation, and some who were even militia members. Many of those militia members had fled across the border into West Timor. So there was a lot of trauma in Timorese families with the fact that they were split by these political and military actions that had happened. They weren't all unified. And the other trauma that many of them felt was the fact that their children had been taken for decades, but many had been taken around the time of the ballot. And so there was a great loss for the people who had died in the violence of 99, for the children who'd been taken, and for the fact that their families were being broken up. It's a very hard thing for families to reunite themselves after that. So that was an underlying thing that was with the Timorese for many years. One important way that we can help the Timorese and help our relationship is for Australians to acknowledge what happened in Timor, to acknowledge the suffering that they've had, the trauma they've had. And one very important part of that, which is kept deep in many people's private history, is the number of Timorese families that were torn apart by the Indonesian policy of taking children from the families. Thousands of children were taken. Families have held onto this hope that one day their family might be reunited, or there's the deep-seated trauma of not knowing what happened to your child, to your brother, to your cousin. Every family in Timor will know of somebody who was taken and live with that grief. And I think the fact that we should be able to talk about this terrible thing that happened to the Timorese, this devastation of families, and we could bear witness to their suffering, will help the Timorese. There were things happening that were very positive in 2000. I was there with lawyers and judges because we were going to go and watch the inauguration of Timor's first judges. And that was rather marvellous, not only because there was an acceptance that there were Timorese who were going to start the whole legal process, but many of these young lawyers were people that I had known as Timorese human rights activists in Indonesia throughout the 1990s. They were people who had lived quite secretly, studying law, working with human rights groups, and now their struggle and the work they had done was being recognised and they were becoming judges. It's really wonderful to see this success and to be able to compare it with what we know of the suffering they experienced in the 1970s, 80s and 90s, the trauma they experienced in 1999, and to see that 20 years later the Timorese are coming out. They're slowly building up, but it's going to be a good, strong, independent, nurturing country. And that's what should motivate me and all other Australians to get out there and to build those bonds of friendship.
Edna Ferrara Sewing Project. In 2017, Edna Ferrara was given an opportunity under the Timorese government scheme of microbusiness to open a shop at the old helicopter base and army base in Dili that was occupied by the troops during Interfet. Her dream of opening a small business to earn extra money and to create an employment opportunity for others had become a reality with the use of some old sewing machines and a young Timorese girl looking for some work. Last year, with the government election, business slowed down and the rent in the shop began to rise. Edna had to move her business to her home in Dili and started doing jobs for local communities. She saved on rent but still needed to pay the staff. She promotes the business through hotels and tourists when ships come to Dili and when they have students from other countries. Edna also sells bags and wallets in Baokao, her hometown, and makes items of clothing for weddings and special occasions. Edna and her sister plan to accommodate tourists in their home for people who want that Timor experience. Edna also works in the office of Eco Tours in Dili, providing student immersion tours into village life in Timor-Leste. Atlas provides support for wages through this difficult period, which has continued into the year with COVID-19, affecting the tourism and student immersion visits to Timor-Leste, and hence Edna's ability to earn an income. The Carmelite Sewing Project. In January 2018, the Carmelite sisters made a proposal to Atlas to set up a sewing workshop at Ferrara and training some sisters as well as some girls from the orphanage to acquire sewing skills. At the end of the training, some could be employed in this sewing business. This plan also includes some of the women who have had no schooling but who are showing sewing skills and have the capacity for learning. In the initial stage, there was a 6-month training course for 6 women. This training was done by local Timorese at a training organisation in Dili. These women are now trainers in the second stage of the project, training other women. The main outcome for the sewing business was to produce school uniforms for local schools. Currently, many schools in Timor-Leste order their uniforms from Indonesia. A sewing workshop was set up with equipment and other resources to run it as a small business. The women then began by making uniforms for the children in the Carmelite orphanages. Atlas considered the proposal and was very much in support of this general aim: to promote the dignity of women in our society, to provide them with the means of earning a living, and to prepare them to participate in the development of our country. Visits to the sewing centre last year and by local women this year, Atlas is happy to report that the sewing project is still running and providing school uniforms to their local community. From small startup funding provided by Atlas, great things are happening, with women gaining the skills to earn money and be independent.
Your continued support is greatly appreciated. If you'd like to contribute financially to this Atlas project, please visit our website to make a donation. There's a number of ways you can support Atlas, none of which involve money. Visit our website, atlas.org.au, and subscribe to our email newsletter. Like us on Facebook at facebook.com/Atlas East Timor. Subscribe to our YouTube channel, youtube.com/Atlas East Timor. Thank you for your continued support.